Hello to all my queers and dears, and welcome back to Adam Unscripted. I have wanted to do one of these for a while, but here we are now. Um, I haven't done one in a bit, but I felt like this was a good enough reason to do one. Um, so, in case you missed it, Russell T Davies and Battle of Productions are officially leaving Doctor Who, and um, the BBC is doing what's called putting it out to tender, um, which, from what I understand, is basically opening Doctor Who up to pitches from outside sources for like what to do with it going forward. Uh, I have a lot of mixed feelings on this. On one hand, I think it's genuinely a good thing that Russell T Davies is moving on. Um, I have generally a lot of respect for him, but some of that respect has waned in recent years as it's become increasingly clear that he was using Doctor Who as a kind of ego trip. Um, like a lot of his, a lot of the flaws that existed in his original run, of which there were a bunch. People like to sort of memory hole that, but but a lot of the flaws that were there became sort of exacerbated in his return. I mean, he didn't have like other writers. He wrote almost every single episode. He wrote or co-wrote almost every single episode. Um, he just there just weren't other voices involved. Um, and he, it was all him, and he would overindulge it into the spectacle, and I mean, it was there was some amazing stuff. Um, the story in the engine was phenomenal. Just probably one of my favorite episodes in years, and Dot and Bubble was really good too. And Shuti Gatwa was phenomenal. Um, and I feel like he was really done a tremendous disservice over the last few years. So anyways, I wanted to put some thoughts out on this, just sort of in my most immediate like reaction. You know, first of all, you know, there's of course concern, right? There's concern that the BBC might go for the highest bidder over someone who genuinely cares about Doctor Who, and like the highest bidder might be like Paramount. Um, and the people in charge of Paramount aren't exactly compatible with the entire core of Doctor Who. So, the hope would be that the BBC would, to some degree, still value the things that make Doctor Who special, and the core values of the Doctor themselves. Um, and that they would care about whether or not the new people to take over would also value those things. Um, but right now we don't know. There is a chance this can go very well. Again, like I think that um, Russell T Davies has heavily mishandled his return in a lot of ways that really sabotage the reputation of the show. Um, and did Shudigatwa a tremendous disservice as the 15th Doctor. Um, and of course, there's the fact that Billy Piper was, popped up on screen at the very end, and like whatever creative team comes next, whether or not they want to deal with that or not, is sort of, you know, like, do you pick up where he left off, where Russell T Davies left off, or do you try to start anew? Um, my fellow creator Pup put out a video today. Um, and he says he thinks that it would be better to do a sort of soft reboot, um, where you can sort of pick and choose a little bit what you want to take from the past. Um, and that you sort of leave the RTD2 era behind, and clean break from that. I don't know about that. I think that there are everything was a little too big to cleanly start anew. Um, I think that, if someone new comes in, you'd want to do a special with Billy Piper just to resolve that. Unfortunately, again, like just part of the news that came out today, they've canceled the um, they've canceled the Christmas special that was previously announced. Um, they had previously said that scripts were written, that the pitch was really exciting for the BBC, and now Russell T Davies has come out and said that actually he'd never written any script, and no actors were approached to play the next Doctor. Um, I don't know. I don't know what to make of that. I love Doctor Who a lot, and I hope that it has a bright future. And I hope that the next person that's brought in is hopefully a voice that is younger and sort of outside some of the, like, since 2005 we have had the same group of friends leading Doctor Who. First Russell T Davies, then his close friend Stephen Moffat, then their close friend Chris Chibnall, and then Russell T Davies again. And we need new voices. um we definitely need voices that are, you know certainly not, if I may be frank, middle-aged white men who just had a fondness for Doctor Who from their childhood. Like, there needs to be more boldness than that, and people more in tune with the current state of the world. um you know it, so I'm glad to some degree that we are moving on from that little circle of friends that has been in charge of Doctor Who since 2005. Um, Nonetheless, as I say, that there is a lot of concern about how exactly the pitching process will go. And I don't want to fearmonger, but I also want to be realistic. Um, and that sort of means being like, I don't know what's going to happen. Nobody does. Um, but that does mean that if people start saying, oh, Doctor Who is gone forever, or, it's going to be another 10 years, or, it was killed for being too woke or whatever, like, nobody knows. And that means that those things aren't true either. Like, that's really important. Okay. Like, the fear mongering around, and the general, heightened language that tends to come around an announcement like this. That's an Those people don't know either. That's really important to remember, right? Um, so, who knows at this point? There is a chance for this to bring Doctor Who into a much brighter future than it has had. Um, you know, uh, there's sort of a sense that it could be a much brighter future when Russell T Davies came back to some degree, but even then, it was sort of tainted by the fact that they just went back to Russell T Davies, and Russell T Davies started his new era with bringing back David Tennant and Catherine Tate, and like Like there is there was a little bit of a tainted start to it, um, from that very, I ended up liking the 60th specials a decent amount. Um, but it's still like it icks me out a little bit every time I see a poster with all the incarnations of the Doctor and David Tennant is on there twice. Like there's something a little uncomfortable about that for me because it feels very antithetical to Doctor Who to have just gone back and sort of double dipped uh for nostalgia points like that. Like it's one thing to bring something back and then do something new with it. Um like the double dipping is usually bringing a doctor back for some kind of special or something like that. But to have a regeneration that is so obviously nostalgia pandering, like when David Tennant came back, I had hoped that there would be like the fact that he was technically playing the 14th Doctor as opposed to the 10th Doctor again. I'd hoped like, oh, maybe they'll let him use his natural Scottish accent. Or like David Tennant is more than talented enough to just play a completely different version of the Doctor that just looks like David Tennant again. Um, but they went back to Alan C, and like there were differences to some degree, um, but he still felt a lot like the 10th Doctor, and like that was part of the point. Like Russell T Davies literally said, like that like what would be the point of bringing David Tennant back if he didn't basically act like the 10th Doctor again? And like to me that was very disappointing. Not that again, I generally like the 60th anniversary specials. David Tennant is as always a phenomenal performer. Of course, the writing of Rose Noble was rather clunky in terms of trans representation, and particularly became more uncomfortable recently as Russell D Davies came out and said that he has a bunch of gender critical friends, which we don't. It's not like Russell D Davies hasn't come out in very clear defense of trans rights, and yet there's a little bit of a tainting of that now, right? Like it's it's messy now, and you know, and there's a sense that he didn't really do the work the first time around. Like he had someone yell out Rose's dead name, and parent, and and then they had this messiness of sort of conflating uh non-binary identity with um trans identity, and like they're sort of part of the same umbrella, but they're not exactly the same. And then there was this whole thing about sort of biological essentialism, where like, oh, a male presenting Time Lord wouldn't have understood. Um, you know, I don't know. It's it's all a bit weird. And it just a lot of it fell short, quite frankly, for a lot of people. But there was some great stuff. So the question is sort of what should things look like going forward? Um, like I said, I kind of disagree with Pop. I think that you should get Billy Piper back, but I also think that there is no reason that you have to stick to what Russell T Davies' initial plans were. Um, what his ideas were in bringing her back. Um, which I also consider a mistake because it squishes our first lead black doctor in between two white blatant nostalgia plays, and Shooty got what, and whoever the first black doctor was to lead the show, or just non-white doctor to lead the show would have been, that just is so offensive, like, to, because it overshadows him inherently to have um these two, very white blatant plays to fan nostalgia on either side of them. um but nonetheless, I think that, Billy Piper coming in is something that's just a bit too big to ignore. um there is always going to be more questions about that in a way that, like, you can't just sort of skip over. um So I think that, but again, I think that if someone comes in and says, "Hey, I want to, like," if someone comes in with a pitch about where Doctor Who can go, and they land the pitch, and they decide that, they want to go in a different direction with Billy Piper than Russell T Davies was planning to do, I think go for it. Particularly if they don't want to treat her as the Doctor. If they want to make it like a sort of bad wolf thing, that sort of messed with, or whatever, like, to make her not the 16th Doctor. Like I said, like, I get a little uncomfortable and a little bit of an ick every time I see a poster of all the Doctors and David Tennant is on there twice, and that would, double if Billy Piper was on there, because it would just feel like, you know it would just feel a little gross. um I do think that, um if you want to, like, I had thought of this a while back, but, like, you know one of the things that I think is just, like, really, like, easy money, or, just easy popularity for Doctor Who, is to, do animated Doctor Who, and just basically adapt the Big Finish audios into animation. Um, like, that is a surefire success. People already love those. Um, and and you get, the Eighth Doctor, you get, the Fugitive Doctor, you get more of all these past Doctors, that people love. Like, that is an easy way to dip into, the love for older stuff and the existing, and just adapt, the ones that people love the most, or whatever, like, just sort of recanonize them to the main show. To me, that makes a lot of sense. An audio drama, it's written a little differently because, of course, you can't rely on the visual medium, but I think you can pretty easily adapt them, because you still have, you just need a little bit of, like, maybe, editing of the scripts, but you could, I think, pretty easily adapt the existing voice acting into an animated medium. Um, you know, I haven't, tried to do that, admittedly, but I think you could. Um, you know, um, and there's so many, characters that have gotten a lot of love in the Big Finish audios that haven't gotten as much attention in the show. So, you could really bring in a lot of stuff. And then for the main show, you keep looking forward. Um, so I think that that would be, I mean, not that, I mean, obviously animation is expensive. So that would be a whole thing, but, like, to me, that's an easy pitch. Um, uh, and then, like, I mean, you would have to find the right outlet, the right studio to do it, but it makes sense to me. to adapt the Big Finish audios into like a animated, streaming show. Um, and then um, and then new person can sort of decide whether or not they want to pick up where Russell left off, um, and try and finish off some of those arcs, some of those teases, but maybe do it in a way that they're more happy with rather than necessarily what his initial ideas were. You know, who is the boss, and to finish off the Susan tease. You know, um, uh, but in a different way. Like there's potential here, and I think that it's not necessarily a bad thing if the new person wants to pick up where Russell left off, um, and just has a bit of a different approach that maybe, like Russell had a history of sort of ignoring the potential consequences of his last season. So, like, at the end of, season two, right? At the end of, at the end of the reality war, um, the 15th Doctor had shifted the entire universe slightly over to one side. And like that has really interesting potential. As like, maybe like one thing I've always loved the idea of, uh, after Gallifrey got destroyed again by, in the Chris Chibnall era, is Gallifreyan refugees, rather than Last of the Time Lord again, as Russell T Davies went and did, and then this whole weird like like bomb, genetic bomb that I guess apparently like both wiped out almost every Time Lord and then also like somehow made Time Lords infertile or whatever. Like that was so weird. That was so weird. But I think the point is that I think that like there's really something really interesting you can pick up on there of like, okay, if you shifted the universe slightly over, what else has changed? Okay, Gallifrey was still destroyed, but maybe instead of the genetic bomb, you had something else happened and it resulted in there being Gallifreyan refugees, rather than a complete wipeout. Um, or and like maybe Bad Wolf slash the moment sort of steps into that regeneration in order to sort of accommodate that shift, into a slightly different reality and sort of, like, I don't know. There's interesting things you could do if you pick up where Russell left off. Um, but also there's baggage, right? So like there's legitimate question there, of what a new person would want to do. I think if I were the one to do it, I would want to tie things off first. At the very least with the Billy Piper thing, and I wouldn't want to ignore the potential of the universe shifting over slightly and the differences that could create, that could be explored, like not massive differences, but enough to cause interesting explorations. Um, you know, it reminds me of post crisis, Arrowverse, um, where you know, like generally the continuity still existed, but you could introduce new ideas, new versions of old rogues and stuff like that, and sort of you know revitalize things through these changes. Now, not every show made the most uh took the most advantage of that, and unfortunately, we really had a lot of stuff that sort of didn't really take advantage of the new status quo. Um, like, you know, but I think there's still, that foundation of, what remains and what's ever so slightly changed in ways that maybe can cause us a bit of trouble going forward, is, ripe with potential. Um, like, I wouldn't want to repeat, like how, like, at the end of the first season with Shooty Gatwa, like, they did this whole thing of reversing death across the universe, and like it only affected the death that Sutek did. Like, come on. There's so many interesting things you could actually do with the idea of, like, reversing death across the universe. If you're going to present that as the solution, like, let's explore the unintended consequences of that. And Russell just didn't even touch that. So, like, I would hope to some degree that, uh and I do want to say, like, there were things that, like, Chris Chibnall left sort of open ended and unexplored around, like, the flux, for example, which, he sort of didn't really deal with the ramifications of, like, the the flux apparently wiping out like a huge chunks of the universe. And Russell came back with the 60th anniversary and, like, showed that that really affected the Doctor, like, that tortured him for a good while, until he was able to sort of slow down and try and heal. um so, there's a lot of stuff that can be done, even when things are unpopular, like, like, and then the way that, Russell, tied in this idea of, the Doctor being adopted, as an interesting part of his character in Shooty's first season, or him, really not knowing where he comes from anymore. Like, he technically comes from Gallifrey, but his foundational roots are beyond that, beyond the limits of the universe itself in some ways, and, like, he doesn't know what to make of that. And, like, Russell T Davies took those threads that Chris Chibnall didn't do anything with and tied them into his writing of the Doctor, and it was great. It was really compelling. So, long story short, I think that there's something you can do here that isn't just throwing away what we have because it's too messy. Um, but you can sort of, like, the same way that, like, the Doctor being half human was ignored for a long time and sort of still is. Like, there's a lot of things you can do without throwing the baby out with the bathwater, concerning these last few years of Doctor Who. Um, and I would encourage anyone who, comes in to not be afraid to tie some of those loose ends off with their own ideas. And I think we can just try and hope that, whoever comes in whoever gets picked to continue Doctor Who is someone who is really invested in the potential and the characters and the world and all this stuff, not as, like, a childhood fan, but as a storyteller, who wants to see Doctor Who become something truly great, not in the sense of a blockbuster franchise, but in the sense of everything that makes Doctor Who special and just bringing it into a new era. So, we'll see what happens. Those are sort of my thoughts. What are your thoughts? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and let's talk about it.